This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The champion, welcome, Danny Batten.
Hey guys, I'm Si. Welcome to A.C.E Podcast Nation, the home of the Danny Batten Fight Show. This is episode number 116, I believe. We are powered by Violent Money. Please do check out Violent Money TV on YouTube, and of course the Violent Money products in store at www.violentmoney.co.uk. And we have a 20% discount code exclusively for you guys to use to get 20% all off all apparel and clothing. Use the code ACE20 for 20% off. And please do check out the first smart gym in the UK, the Violent Money Academy. It's an incredible facility. And we will eventually have a virtual tour of said facility to join us and as we talk about it. But for the time being, take my word for it. Check it out on social media. It's well worth a look. Have a look on their website as well. And all that good stuff. As always, we're live on YouTube and we're live on Facebook. We've cut the Twitter feed, so it's just the Facebook and YouTube this week. And then eventually it's going to be YouTube exclusive and then the audio download afterwards. So if you do watch live, it's going to be YouTube only. So please do check that out. If you do listen live, if you do listen via audio for this show or any of the other shows that we do, check out the Sports Social Podcast Network, the UK's first dedicated Sports Podcast Network, and it's all of our content there and the various titles: Danny Batten Fight Show, Rodriguez Show, My Story, all these different things, all by us, including our exclusive interviews from combat sports and beyond. So check them out. But as always, we're going to be joined by a top guest from combat sports this evening, who I'll introduce in just a second. Plus, we have our boxing pundit Ben Doughty joining us. And, of course, the legend himself. I'm delighted to introduce former Cage Warriors world champion and UK MMA legend, Mr. Danny Batten. How are you, my friend?
I'm really good, sire, and listeners. Absolute stonking UFC, so I can't wait to do some coverage of that as well a little bit later.
Yes, lots to talk about, mate. It was a good one. And I'm looking forward to getting our guests' views on last weekend's MMA as well, because there was a lot of incredible moments and fights. But I'm delighted to complete the full set of Figlak brothers, and I'm very happy to welcome Cage Warriors welterweight Matt Figlak to the show. How are you, mate?
Hi guys, I'm all good. Thanks for having me on the show.
No worries, mate. Some would say we've saved the best for last, isn't it? It's the second Figlak is the best. Is that right?
I don't know about that.
No, I'm only playing. Obviously we had Mike on a few weeks back now, I think. But it was a really good one. I enjoyed chatting to him. So we're going to talk a bit about your career, a bit about you, a bit about how you got into everything and all that sort of good stuff. Maybe a couple of questions from the live chat. But I do, first of all, kind of want to get your take on some of the stuff from last weekend, because there was some just incredible fights from Cage Warriors, from the UFC London. Obviously, we've all had a week to digest it. But overall, what did you think of? We'll start with the UFC. What did you think of the UFC London event as a whole, Matt?
An amazing event. I will one day be part of an event like that, I believe. It was just great to have the UFC back in the UK. You know, the fans really came out and supported everyone, all the British guys. It was really good some really good level as well of fighting. I was really impressed with Tom Aspinall. For such a big guy, a heavyweight, he's able to move really, really fast and took care of business really quick. He's the one really who impressed me the most. Yeah, but it's really great to have the UFC back in London, and that's the main thing, you know, back in the UK.
Yeah, and I think they'll be. I believe that they'll be back in the UK within a couple of months. I do. You could see by Dana White's reaction afterwards, by his comments about the reaction that Paddy the Bowdy got, the performance by Tom Aspinall and Arnold Allen, and others. And in fairness, I mean, the Brits really, really turned up in terms of results. I think it was unfortunately only Corey McKenna who didn't win her fight, which is unfortunate. But I was speaking to someone about Jack Shaw this week, Dan, and just saying, like, not just how good that performance was in that third round, but they commented on how top level his corner was in that final break between rounds 2 and 3. To how many times over the years have we seen camps and corners and whatever saying, "Oh yeah, we think you're 2 rounds up," just and then they get knocked out, or they don't go about that last round properly, and then they end up getting done on the scorecard. Jack Shaw went out and put on. I saw Brett Johns say this week that it was one of the best rounds of MMA he's ever seen. And I think the corner deserve a lot of credit for sending Jack out with that mindset to go and get the job done and see it through, rather than just believing he was 2 rounds up.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 2 things in play when you're doing the corner in that sort of situation that Jack Shaw had. One, being honest, and one, getting that honesty correct, to know what you're seeing in those first 2 rounds. They were close, and depending on judging, as we know how judges can be, they could have been going the other way. And it was nice to see him push through to try to get an outright win in that third round. But look, he did do enough in one of those other rounds, along with that third round, to notch up the win. It was a very mature performance. It's something that we've been saying about Jack Shaw numerous times now. He is really fighting beyond his years, both with his age and beyond his experience in terms of his total amount of fights that he's accumulated. But that all wins. And it's just so good to see. He's a star that's going to be burning brighter and brighter as time passes by. I have no doubts that this kid's going to be a future champion sometime in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and I think I saw a lot of people on social media this week, Matt, saying that was one of the best rounds of kind of MMA they'd seen in terms of performance, or third rounds, I think it was the kind of thing. Like, were you impressed about how he went? He was a tough opponent as well. How Jack Shaw finished off that fight in that third round.
Yeah, it was Jack Shaw fights. His fighting style is always very calculated, very sticks to the basics with his striking, very good on the ground. And he did win that fight. I think so too. That third round, I can't really remember it too well. But overall, I remember that the whole fight was
times, didn't he?
Yeah. But I remember that the whole fight was pretty much going in Jack's favor, although there was some back and forth exchanges there in the grappling. He's a very impressive guy. Like you said, Danny, very mature, fights very mature for his age. Obviously undefeated. I'm always impressed with his performances.
It's quite bad that he's 16-0, but also still, I think he's like mid-20s or something. Like he's quite a young guy in terms of his career and things like that. He's not even reached his peak, some would say. Matt, what would you say about, or what did you think of the Cage Warriors event on the Friday, which it almost got in the hyperbole afterwards of UFC London. It almost got lost a little bit in that, but that was an incredible event in itself. It was a really, really good event with some big performances. Obviously, Jordan came out and got the finish with a change of opponent that he would have been looking for after. How difficult is it, mate, to have a change of opponent at that very sort of, I think it was 3 days before?
It all depends how you take it, really. I mean, for me, I don't really prepare for the fighter so much during my camp. I'm more preparing myself and what I have to do. So a change of opponent is out of my control. So I just have to go in there and do whatever I have to do. So it's not in my control. It's not something that I would focus on, but it can be difficult. Yes, it can be difficult because you sometimes get completely different styles. So you meant to fight a striker, you get a wrestler. So it's a completely different fight, different use of energy, different energy systems. So on some people, it can play on their mind, but obviously on Jordan, it didn't. He went in there, got the job done. I believe it was in the first round, right?
That's right. Yeah. Second round finish.
The second round, sorry. Second round.
Yeah.
It was a rear naked choke, standing upright. Very nice. He got the job done, and now he moves on wherever that goes. Whether he goes to the UFC or the fight does happen with Paul Hughes again, we'll see.
Yeah. A little bit more on that change of opponent side. I think initially styles can obviously be different. If you're preparing for a wrestler and then you get a striker, obviously you can get some issues that come along with that, I guess. But I think the biggest battle regards that situation was we was preparing for this mental battle that Jordan and Hughes have. They're very, very similar in their motivation and in their confidence that they're the better of the two. And that was more the preparation that was going on, as well as all the technical and strategical aspects. There was a lot of mental preparation for Hughes. And then when that all dropped through, there must have been, or it seemed to be, a big dump of like, oh, what? You're joking. But Jordan being Jordan, very, very self-motivated. And, and it was just a case of adapting and changing and just accepting the situation. And no matter what that situation is to overcome it and still push and get that win, however that may come. And it come in the fashion of that nice, tasty little submission in that second round.
Slick it was. The other thing I suppose as well is like that fight between Jordan and Paul Hughes was, in my opinion, probably one of the biggest fights that Cage Warriors put on in their history in terms of the opponents, the event, the weekend it was on. Everything had kind of fallen into place for this huge match to unify the sort of interim title and the main title. And I think for that to fall through, like you said there's definitely a mental side to that, having been, you've prepared yourself for what is the biggest fight in his career, in history, but also it's not underestimating your opponent just because your opponent's not Paul Hughes anymore. James Hendon was a very dangerous opponent. He brought his own set of problems, and it was about being professional, mate, I guess, in getting the job done, which obviously he was, and he did. I enjoyed it, I got to say. I enjoyed the whole weekend. I wish every weekend was UFC London weekend, to be honest. Rob Boyle in the comments has asked a question. He says, who's your dream opponent, past or present?
Oh, that's a first. No one's ever asked me that question. A dream opponent. I don't know. I don't ever really dream of an opponent. I just take them as they come. But I would say right now on the spot, I would say someone like GSP, because he was the best, right? He was considered a GOAT at one stage, although I think John Jones is the GOAT in my weight class, though. So there you go. GSP, I would say.
Good shout. And that, that's an interesting conversation. on that conversation of like who's the GOAT and stuff, someone who always comes up in that conversation, Danny, is Mighty Mouse, who obviously I was fortunate enough to interview last year, which was a real bucket list thing for me. And he fought on 1X, the rearranged event over the weekend against Rodang. And they did 1 round MMA. Then the next round was Muay Thai, then MMA, then Muay Thai, then MMA. I think it was that order. Mighty Mouse won with a rear naked choke in the first MMA round, basically, I think it was. Are you surprised by the result? I'm not sure if you've seen the fight, but I mean, are you surprised by the result? Like for me personally, I kind of felt like if Mighty Mouse was going to get the opportunity to get his hands on him, he was probably going to submit him. But equally, I felt like Rodang is so dangerous, but he is young, and Mighty Mouse is so experienced at the top level that it was just going to come down to if Rodang was going to be able to sort of nail him with one of the Muay Thai kicks or strikes before they got to the MMA rounds, I guess.
Who's that to?
You. That's why I said
Okay.
Danny.
I was just making sure.
Pay attention. Come on.
No, I'm not surprised. Although, obviously his opponent was extremely dangerous, but it was obvious where he was going to be dangerous. It was obvious what Mighty Mouse was wanting to do, but it's so hard to try to stop someone like Mighty Mouse who's got such a diverse set of skills and approaches to get what he wants where he wants it. And, when you talk in terms of like GOATs, I think Mighty Mouse was overlooked a little bit, maybe because there was not as bigger amount of attention down in his lower weight class, although there is absolutely now. But this guy was dominant for many years. I mean, really, really dominant. I mean, so convincingly winning time and time again. I really feel like he didn't get his just deserves regards to the attention side in UFC. I think he was a little bit overshadowed by some of the other weight divisions, unfortunately. But
it was weird how they did it, though, wasn't it? They traded him out, probably the greatest flyweight of all time, and then all of a sudden started focusing on the flyweight division, whereas he's been there for years, beating everybody, beating people coming down a weight, just beating everybody. And they just really barely promoted the division as a whole. And then they traded him for Ben Askren. And of course, we all know the history there. I mean, who do you think got the better deal, Dan, there with hindsight?
Well, at the end of the day, look, Mighty Mo's still got hunger to fight. He's gone off to one championship, which put on some really exciting fights.
Yes.
I really do love watching that. Oh, is that you, Si?
Yeah, that's me. I forgot to take my phone.
Sorry.
Naughty.
I think he's gone on to do some really great things. And it just amazes me his enthusiasm. He could have really have just put to bed his career, and what a fantastic one that was in UFC, but he's chose to go on and ferment himself to be even more great than he showed to be in UFC by performing exceptionally well in one championships, which is very, very competitive, and I would say arguably much more aggressive than the UFC stylists.
The thing which one championship have got is they've got a lot of really good young fighters. And like obviously we focused a lot recently on Gary Toonan, who fought Than Lee. Obviously quite two well-known people in terms of Gary Toonan's widely regarded as one of the best grapplers in the world. And Than Lee obviously was on The Ultimate Fighter and has been around the block, beating the UFC, the current champ. And Than Lee destroyed Gary in, I think it was about 30 seconds. Which I was surprised by, but not surprised also because Than Lee is such a good fighter. And I think people just assume sometimes, like people, when I say people, I mean maybe the more casual fans, they kind of assume, because they've gone to one championship, they're not as good, or they're not good enough to be in the UFC or Bellator or whatever. But actually, in actual fact, Cage Warriors, PFL, one championship have got some of the best fighters in the world now. If you look at their rosters, they've truly got some of the best, particularly fighters from say 20 to 27. Some of the best fighters in that age group are actually in those promotions where they're looking to make a name for themselves outside of the UFC. Like I look at I know you follow PFL quite regularly, Danny. Who's the Irish fella who's in it? I always forget his name.
Don't hit me with names under pressure.
Brendan something.
I'd have to look it
I'll
up.
remember in a minute. I'll have to have a look. But I know you like that the Pro Fight League. I haven't been able to watch it as much. But
recently I've been falling behind it, but I've had so much on regards different fights and fight events that I've been on just recently. So it's been hard to follow so many enjoyable fight shows. I mean, Bellator's really got its act together. I've been putting on some fantastic fights as well, and it's hard to stay on top of so many UFCs, Cage Warriors, PFL, and One Championship. There's been so much going on, and we're trying to give attention to each of them, aren't we? Because we've had friends on our show that we have to try and follow, such as Mighty Mouse and Thornley, and we've had Gary Tonon on, like you mentioned. But that was a really interesting fight. Just to touch on that fight, I was absolutely intrigued watching it. And look, we could have been having a very different conversation if Gary had nailed one of those heel hooks in. We could have said, look how he overwhelmed him. But, on the feet, you could take the risk and go balls out for the knockout, and it either works or you gas yourself trying to do it, and then things can be consequential thereafter. Or like Gary Tonon did, he went balls out for that heel hook.
I was going to say, did he pull guard? If I remember correctly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's like shot in. It's just one of those things that happen in a scramble. I mean, things were very fast being really early on in the first round, and I think it's just his teddy bear. I remember when I trained with Greg Jackson, he said people with a specific style in their game, a preferred style, they'll always go back to their teddy bear, meaning that preferred style. Gary Tonon went back to his comfort zone, and that was to start trying to hit in on these heel hooks. Now, that's all well and good when it pulls off really nice, and we've seen it work in the past time again, but it's like this striking idea. You could put balls out and go for the knockout, but if it don't come about and you exhaust yourself from it, you're going to face the consequences of it. Look, he went balls out for that submission. He really, really tried to commit it. The thing is with leg locks, you're giving up 2 legs to control the position of the knee line, and you're giving up 2 arms to try and reach that knee and ankle across, leaving nothing in defense for your head. And that's the trade-off, He just went back to his teddy bear, went back to what was in his genetics regards all these years of training. No matter the fact that he's come over to MMA, putting other things in his game, he went back to his comfort zone, and being, pushing it so traditional in terms of his background did come with its risks, and he paid the ultimate price, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah,
go on, man.
Yeah, I was going to say I did watch that fight as well, and I do think similarly to what you just said, Danny. It is a dangerous game to play those leg locks, and when it comes to MMA, like you said, you're using 2 legs and 2 arms to control the person trying to get that leg lock, whereas the other person, if he has a strong stance and puts the weight on that leg, he can really crack you with a shot from a way up. So we've seen that before also with, what's the fighter in the UFC?
Damian Maia used to do it a lot, didn't he?
Ryan, I think.
Ryan Hall.
Ryan Hall, yes.
Yeah.
He did it recently, and he got knocked out too. So it's a really dangerous game to play, but obviously these guys, grappling heavy, so their best chance is down there. So they might as well try for that.
Yeah. But I was actually quite impressed with the few techniques that were thrown out by Gary Tonon in regards to striking. They were done confidently. Okay, didn't feed such a big combination, but the strikes that he was throwing, you can say, well, he's clearly improved himself, but it's just he doesn't have, as much confidence as someone like Thornley. Thornley's bread and butter is on the feet. He doesn't feel the pressure there. But I was actually impressed with what Gary was doing. But, like I said, when I train with Greg Jackson, it's so true. When you either get fatigued or you feel the pressure, you're going to go back to your comfort, whatever that style is. And Gary Tonon showed that pressure was to get it on the ground, keep it on the ground. He kind of rushed for the submission. And like I say, we could be having a very different conversation if he'd pulled it off. He just unfortunately faced the deficit of going balls out on submissions such as a heel hook.
For sure. Matt, have you got like a preferred discipline in your game that whether it be striking or grappling or wrestling? Is there something within your game where you feel most comfortable?
I don't really have a preferred, but I like to be entertaining in my fights. I like to give the people what they want. And what do people want? They want knockouts. They want knockouts. So I do focus a lot of my time on striking and boxing and to get those knockouts, but I do not neglect wrestling or grappling, but yeah, everyone loves a knockout,
Mhm.
everyone loves a knockout. I do love to get people out of there as quick as I can.
Yeah, Matt, so I wanted to ask you this. I've made more and more friends within MMA through Danny and through people who I've met from interviews, and I've become friends with certain people and whatnot. Sometimes I've noticed a lot recently where they've all been fighting on the same cards and things like that. Is I really get quite anxious watching these guys fight. Much more anxious than I used to. And they're friends or acquaintances in some cases, or just people who I might like because I've interviewed them or whatever. Like, how is that for you with your brother? Obviously, I would assume you're relatively close, and when you're watching, you're helpless, aren't you? It's not the same as being, when you're fighting, you're in control to a certain degree. How is it watching your brother from the sidelines fight, and vice versa for him, I would assume?
Yeah, for me, it's not an anxious feeling. It's not an anxious feeling. I'm very confident in what we have done in the camp, preparing for the fights. I know that in each of the fight that we go into, I know that Mike is going to win. And what I do and what I focus on doing my job. What do I have to do to make sure everything is good? I make sure to be a good corner man, to let him know all the instructions that he needs between the rounds, during the round, times, whatever he needs, whatever I think he needs. I focus on that. I don't focus on, being anxious that he's fighting. Maybe I've got to fight later or whatever. I went first, he's second. I focus on what my job is for him.
Yeah.
Make sure everything is good.
Do you find it easier to be honest with each other? It's like one of the things which me and Danny have talked about a lot over all these shows that we've done is the importance of corners being saying, relaying the correct messages during a fight and the circumstances, but also being honest with the fighter if they're not performing well, and telling them they need to up their game, or if they're behind, telling them you need to finish this now in the final fight. We see so often corners aren't perhaps clear enough when they say you need to finish now in this last round. Do you find that a bit easier because you're brothers to be a bit more honest with each other?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you have to be honest. You have to be honest. It could cost you the fight. If your corner is not honest with you, it could cost you the fight. So you need to have trust in your corner. You need to have confidence in your corner. You need to be close enough with them for them to tell you to be honest with you. There's no awkwardness there. You have to be honest. It could cost you the fight, whether it's 1-1 and going into the last round, you need to say, look, you need to go for the finish. You need to get this guy out of there, or you need to win this round. This is very important. And for me and Mike, we're as honest as it gets towards each other. We're very critical, and we just say it how it is. We just want the best for each other. So I'm going to tell him if he needs to do something.
Yeah, it's funny. Like Danny, I completely, I agree with what Matt said there. I would have thought, obviously I haven't been a fighter myself, but like I would think as an athlete at anything, but particularly in fighting when you go in, when the bell rings and it's just you and your opponent. You need all that advice. You need as much advice as you need, but you also need to know exactly how other people are seeing the fight. If it's close and you're not sure, you do need to know, like, if your performance is good enough, or where you need to improve. And so often we do see corners give mixed messages on, like, on TV and in the UFC and things. You can see mixed messages. You can see incorrectly telling someone that they're up in a fight when maybe everyone else seems to think they're not. Like, why do you think we see that when, as Matt's just said, very eloquently, that honesty is so vital?
Absolutely, it's vital because you need to know how to address each and every round that's coming, and particularly if you're behind. But they were close rounds, but your cornerman can see that these rounds could arguably be going the other way. That final round, you have to be going out there looking to finish. It wouldn't be good policy to just to be striking on the feet and keep shooting in and working up against the cage, because that takes up so much of the time of the round where it's highly unlikely to get a quick finish. You want to be on the feet. You want to be banging out big shots. Unfortunately, gone are the days that you can take someone down and just feel confident to just ground and pound them out in the final round when you're already gassed from the previous two. And then, that's not even talking about championship rounds. There's a lot of fatigue that comes into play. It becomes harder to finish, but the best place you got to get the finish is on the feet. You have to absolutely have to be honest. And I would think the cornermanship and the honesty is going to be even more closely communicated when you've got two brothers in there. I've had my brother do corner for me in my early MMA bouts, and I found myself much more confident in the instruction that I was getting. He's a very accomplished martial artist in himself, and I know he knew my game very well. I knew he knew whether something was hurting or whether I was feeling a bit fatigued, and he'd help me strategize around it. I really got a lot of comfort having my brother in the corner. But imagine this situation. We touched on Jack Shaw, but he has his father in the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got my son, and I can't even begin to envisage what it'd be like watching him in there, fatigued, hurting, going through some hardship.
Danny, that makes the instructions that Richard and Carl gave Jack in that final team talk, if you like, or the final between the final two rounds, it makes it even more impressive, because in that second round, Jack, for the first time, had a bit of adversity to face. He was in a guillotine, and there was one point in that guillotine where I thought, he looks like he might have him here. And even Jack said afterwards in one of his interviews, like he kind of made the decision within that if he wasn't able to escape, he was just going to go out. He wasn't going to tap. So, I mean, that shows that there was, that was at one point that was in, and it was a problem. But when he came to the corner between rounds 2 and 3, Richard and Carl, they were able to just be clear and concise with their instructions, and obviously that helped Jack then go on and put on that performance. I can't imagine it. I struggle watching my oldest boy play football because he's a goalkeeper. If he makes a mistake, it's a goal, isn't it? And I get stressed out watching that. So God knows what I'd be like watching him, in UFC or something like this, where you've got to watch so much, watch out for so much. But it's an interesting. I am really interested in it, because there's a brothers is a special bond, isn't it? And I think one thing you need from your corner is honesty. So you're always going to get that from your brother, I'd have thought. Do you argue with Mike much, Matt, generally?
Not so much now. I would say now that we're a little bit older. We're into our 20s now. But yeah, we used to quite a bit, as you can imagine. Scuffles and fights all the time. Just normal sibling stuff.
Yeah. Do you sparring ever get out of hand? Like, not out of hand, but like get a bit rough maybe than perhaps it would.
Yeah. We would not anymore. Now we keep it quite professional, but yeah, we used to early on. We used to, sometimes get out of hand. We'd have coaches tell us off, like, you can't be doing this. Like, people are watching. There's people in the class, Yeah, that did happen. Definitely, yeah.
And what about obviously Mike fought Oban Elliott back pre-COVID, wasn't it, or during COVID, I think. And they before the fight, there was a bit of needle there. There was a bit of animosity there, and they bumped into each other before the fight, and there was obviously they had a few words. What's that like for you? Are you just trying to sort of tell Michael just wait for the fight, or are you kind of also irritated by Oban at the time, or were you the?
Oh no, I don't have a say in what Mike is going to do and how he's going to react. He reacts how he reacts, I think both me and Mike think that Oban is not of good character as a person, and we didn't like some things that he said. And then whatever happened. But I don't, whatever Mike wants to do, he will do. I'm not going to tell him, no, don't do that, calm yourself down or something like that. He's his own man. He can handle it, he can do whatever he wants. And he did. And then he went into the fight and proved who's the top dog,
Yeah, he put on a very, very good performance in that fight. Particularly,
I think in that fight, it was just a total domination. I would say even punishment. I would say just 3 rounds of domination. You can't get better than that, and then finish right at the end. Put your opponent down and then pound them out. That's how you want these rivalries to end, just like that.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely, mate. So. What was I going to ask? I was going to ask you something about, I've forgotten what it was now. In terms of where you want to go next with your fight career, now that we've seemed to be moving past COVID, are you just really looking to fight as often as possible and sort of get some continuity going in your career, or have you got certain goals that you have set yourself? How do you go about it?
Yes, of course. I want to fight as often as I can. 5 times a year would be perfect for me, really. And obviously I've gone into Cage Warriors, and the only thing for me, the plan is I get the title, and then I go from Cage Warriors, I go to UFC. Once I get in the UFC, I go through the ranks to get the title, and so on. That's just a mental picture in my head that I always have, and it's already been set in my head many years ago, so it's still there. It's not going anywhere. Is
there anyone in particular you'd like to fight sort of next time up, or is it just a case of getting back in there?
For me, I'd like to fight whoever Cage Warriors thinks is the best in the welterweight division, because for me, I think I'm the best. So I should be fighting for the title against someone who's second best. So whoever they put in front of me, let's fight. It really doesn't matter for me.
Interesting. So
yeah, Matt, I've got a question, because I'm kind of curious about what you said about your approach. You're just concentrating on being the best you can be in MMA. You just work on all areas. Does this mean that you're not someone that will obsessively study who you're up against? If you get an 8-week camp up against an opponent, are you one of these ones who like to critique and really study your opponent, or do you just have confidence in your skills and let it play out however it may play out, or do you like to strategize and make game plan and so on and so forth?
I leave that to my coach. I leave that to my head coach, Paul Sutherland. I trust in him and what he's doing, but I do always have a look. And I pick up some tendencies very quick, and then I can sort of build a picture of moves in my head that I can use, and then as the camp goes along, I can use them,
right,
and practice them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just reading some of the comments. There's an interesting one which I'll come back to in a minute. Did you watch any of the fights last night? In last night's UFC, Matt?
Yes, I watched a few. I watched Mike DeCasey. I watched that fight. I watched the main event, the Curtis Blade one, and I watched the Matt Brown one. That was a very entertaining one.
Oh, amazing fight! Amazing.
Matt Brown, you're always going to get entertainment, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's have a little chat about some of those.
Oh, very nice.
Let's start with Mark DeCasey's fight. I actually think Mark has been a bit unlucky in some of his fights up to now. So I felt like it was a good time for him to turn up and really show what he is capable of. And I thought he did that. Danny, what did you make of that one? Like, were you impressed by Mark's performance?
Yeah, extremely impressed. That Bolshev's really been coming on the scene in UFC and getting the job done time and time again, doesn't he? On the feet with the striking. But what tactics and strategy. Really, really impressive chain wrestling. really put the grind on Borchev and tired him out and really give him no easy route out to try and get success. He looked largely lost. And if you have a look at each round, from the first round, second round, third round, it become not easy, but where he wanted to push it was becoming an easy process. It was a very, very impressive performance. I was a little bit disappointed with the crowd, actually. I don't know why Mark Casey doesn't seem to have the support of the crowd as much as I feel that he should. I don't think he's a bad young man at all. But I certainly think that he's going to be not only going up in the rankings, but up in favour more so of people after that sort of performance. I think he conducted himself very, very well. I think this kid's got a really, really good future after that sort of performance, because that goes to show that he's with the right type of team and he's got the right frame of mind to strategize, to figure someone out that's potentially very, very dangerous in a specific area, hold his nerve and take away the strengths of that opponent. It was just really, really to behold. Really, really great to see. It's wonderful. You got to remember, this kid ain't like an outright wrestler, although he looked every bit of one. Even DC commented that he was pretty impressed with his wrestling in the after interview, and I think we all was.
Yeah, look, I thought it was about as impressive as he could be without getting like a flash knockout, if you like, or something like along those lines. I thought he was very impressive, and I thought he showed pretty good mental strength. Like you said, the crowd haven't quite taken to him, but also I think he's had a bit of adversity with previous fights. So I thought he showed a lot of mental strength to come through that and to then, put on a performance like that.
The curious side of me was I would have liked to seen Dakasi stand and strike with him, because I actually think he could have still won, maybe even with the striking, but he did the right thing to push to get the win in the way that he did, to put it all in his favor. But Matt, I'm kind of curious to see what you think. I know you're quite analytical in your approach to watching fighters. If this was going to be contested out on the feet, who would you say would have the advantage there?
I would say Casey. I see definitely a speed and some kicking advantage on his side. The other guy, I do not know how to pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But I know the fighter. He's much more come forward, sort of a little bit more ploddy style footwork. So, yeah, I would say, it would have been interesting to see maybe Casey could have gotten a flash knockout with a fast punch or a kick. But I would put it more towards Casey to get something like that, to be honest.
Yeah. I felt like he had options there, but I think after that first round, once in, I think he knew, hey, you know what? I feel like I can keep on getting this guy down. I think he thought, well, this is just the route to win, and there was no need to put it into risk. But as a fan of style, sometimes I'm just like, oh, who would have won that if it was on the feet? I'm kind of curious, but yeah.
Yeah, I think he made a very smart decision, and often fighters use emotions and not their brains to win a fight. And on this occasion, he used his brains.
Absolutely,
he went in the first round. He saw what he can do with him in the grappling exchanges, in the wrestling exchanges, and he took it and went with it all the way to the third round and just dominated every single round.
Have you ever had it in your fights before, where you go in there not really knowing how you're going to play it out, and it just falls into place, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is mainly my hands I've got to use? Have you ever had it where it just felt right to push it in a specific area?
Oh, very difficult for me to go back and think. To be honest with you, when I'm in fights, when everything is already done, I'm sort of on autopilot. It's very difficult for me to recall anything. If I fought something, if I was thinking to stay with this guy on the ground or to go back up to the feet, my instincts take over so much, and my body and my mind knows what to do. So I just let it happen. So I don't really have thoughts as such. But I think in some fights, when you can see that you're dominating in a certain aspect, why not pursue that aspect, right? And get the win,
Yeah.
Indeed. So the other fight you mentioned that you watched was the Matt Brown fight, which went to Brian Barberina via a split decision. Matt, we'll go to you first on this one. Like, how did you see this fight and overall, and what did you think of Matt Brown's performance?
Oh, great fight. Really good fight. You know, I was expecting an all-out war, as it was, really. You know, from Matt Brown, what I was impressed with is his elbows and knees in the clinch and off the clinch. He's very good at those. And the other guy, Barberina, he's got quite loose hands. Some nice boxing on him. So yeah, it was what it was supposed to be. Just a really good fight, you know. And yeah, Matt Brown took that, I think.
What did you think of the guy who did get the decision? What did you think of his performance? What was his name? Brian Barberina. Brian Barberina, yeah.
I've watched some of his fights before. He's like I said, tough guy. You know, he's got some good boxing skills on him, nice and loose in the upper body. Yeah, he put up a good fight. I don't think it was enough. There was some back and forth, obviously, exchanges all the time, but I think Matt Brown did take that. He was more dominant in the exchanges.
Danny, did you think Matt Brown got the split, or did you think that they got it right?
I absolutely agree with Matt, and I'll tell you for why. Matt showed more diverse MMA skills. He was doing some fantastic Thai trips. I mean, it wasn't even straight one-on-one wrestling. These was Thai-style trips. He was doing those short elbows and release and strike, clinch strikes. I think the only thing that went against Matt Brown really was he was being very, very physically vocal with his exhaustion. And I think that may have pushed some of one more of the judges to push it against him. I think that was perhaps the biggest thing that perhaps could have tipped it the wrong way for him. But I absolutely think he did enough. I really do. It was absolute war. He always brings an awesome fight performance up against anyone and everyone that he's gone up against, to be honest. Barberina, it was just a great matchup. I mean, you know, UFC are fantastic for doing matchups. They really, really are. And this one just didn't disappoint. I'm just glad that they're giving Matt Brown the kind of fighters that he can perform well with, because Matt Brown is in his early 40s. You know, if he goes in against, you know, any of the top five, I'm sure he'll get run over by them these days. But, you know, he's still relevant in terms of floating on the outer skirts, or, you know, of the high level guys. Gatekeeper, I think, is a term that gets used. I think he is that and a little bit more, but I do worry about him going on too long. I would say that's the first time, although a great performance, was the first time I began to think, you know what, I think your age is beginning to show with the cardio aspect. I mean, it was a brutal paced fight, it really was, but that show of exhaustion, I think this was not that he wasn't training and preparing right, because I'm sure he always does and always seems to have done, but I think it was more the age factor is creeping in on him now, and I just don't want to see this guy not lose face, because I don't think that will ever happen. I think everyone has that utmost respect for him. I just don't want to see him fight too long, you know, and start taking permanent damage. You know, he's done so much for the sport. He really has. His fan base will always be there for him. And I'd love to perhaps hear him do some commentary or something along those lines and play a different role in the MMA. I don't mean to be writing him off, but I just been such a big fan of his stylistically. I just would like to see him go out on a chapter that's positive rather than negative. I'd like to see him fight again up against someone, you know, that he's still got plenty of capabilities to beat, and maybe see him come out and leave this sport on that win. You know, maybe I'm getting a little bit personally invested in my opinion there about Matt Brown, but I really love this guy's style, and I really enjoyed seeing him fight. I just think it's perhaps time to hang up his gloves.
Interesting, mate. Interesting. Right, Matt, just before we let you go, what we like to do is something called the one-word game. So basically, I'm going to give you like a list of fighters from combat sports, and then you will say the first thing which comes to mind when you hear those names, basically. So, you know, nice and easy. Say whatever you want. Just when you hear that name, what do you think? So, Matt Figlak, the one-word game. Conor McGregor.
Superstar.
Nathaniel Wood.
KO.
Sugar Sean O'Malley.
Clown.
Dana White.
Bossman.
Mighty Mouse.
Legend.
Oban Elliott.
Plonker.
Oh my goodness.
Jake Paul.
Another plonker.
Tyson Fury.
Heavyweight GOAT.
Michael Figlak.
Just a bad man.
And then finally, Paul Sutherland.
Head coach.
There we go. Good stuff. Right, just as we wait for Ben to jump in a minute, did you say you watched the main event, Matt, as well?
Yes, I did. Yeah, the Curtis Blade versus Daukaus, I believe.
Ducasse, yeah. So
Ducasse,
Bruce Bob Trotter in the chat says Ducasse will be running back to the police, begging for his job back. He's more comfortable fighting with guns and has to go back to that ASAP. So I don't know.
Is he a copper?
I think so, yeah. He wasn't. Clearly, Bruce is not a fan.
No.
But in fairness, Curtis Blades is, you just said the words a minute ago, bad man. Curtis Blades is a bad man, and people forget that, yes, he's been finished and he's been beaten, but he's been beaten by good fighters. He's been beaten by excellent heavyweights. And I think sometimes he gets a bit of disrespect in terms of his abilities. Like, the man is a good fighter. He's a very capable fighter. Danny, what did you think of Curtis Blades' performance overall for this one? Because he made relatively short work of it.
He did look really, really quite tidy. And for such a big man, he looks really well coordinated. And that seems to be something that's looking more and more natural with him. He's definitely a better version of himself each time he steps in there. It was just a good performance. It really was. It was hard to read into anything else other than that, because it pretty much went his own way, didn't he? It just made great use of his range. Clearly got power on his side as well. And made good decisions. Didn't make too many risks, which is always the thing with heavyweights, right? If you take too many risks, you never know how that could turn out. You could be winning all the way through. If you start opening up, the recipient, the opponent could easily turn it around and knock you out, right? That's the issue with that weight division. But to me, he played safe. He had nice tight guard. I think he just showed really, really good technique.
I saw a few people this week saying they'd like to see Tom Aspinall face Curtis Blades. Is that a fight you'd like to see?
I would, yeah.
Do you think Tom Aspinall beats him?
Yeah, I think he's a heavyweight champion walking around that just hasn't yet received the belt. I really feel that. I can't help it. I feel that's really to the core.
Like, I got to say, like I said last week, I felt like the only one who's not Ngannou, who potentially could give him some problems, is Stipe. And even then, I kind of lean towards Tom Aspinall because of his all-round game. You mentioned at the right at the start, Matt, how impressed you were with Tom Aspinall. Do you think he would beat Curtis Blades?
Yes, I think he beats Curtis Blades. Yeah.
Who would you like to see him fight next, Tom Aspinall, if you could pick from that sort of top?
Tai Tuivasa, I think they should fight. I think them two should fight, and then whoever wins that fights for the title. Yeah, I think that's the best thing that can happen, really, in that heavyweight division. The two young guys, Tai and Tom Aspinall, would be a great fight. I do. What you said, Danny, you think that Tom Aspinall he's just a champion but hasn't got a belt on him. I do think the same, but I think the only man to stop him would be Ngannou. I don't think there's anyone in the heavyweight division that will beat Tom Aspinall. Just the way he moves, he seems to be like a speed ahead of everyone else. very good athleticism and coordination as well. Some good hands. He obviously trained with the Furies, so he's got some good hands on him. Yeah, I think he beats everyone in that division, and the only challenge that he has, it's the big boss at the end of the game, which is Ngannou. I think.
And what a big boss he is. Let's be honest.
I think Cyril Gane could be an interesting match.
Very quickly, just before we let Matt go and bring Ben in, Cyril, did you see Cyril Gane's quotes about
No.
Tom Aspinall this week? He basically said, to paraphrase, he basically said Tom Aspinall's a better version of him, which I was taken aback a little bit. I thought, maybe there's a bit of a bit of psychological mind games and stuff to that. But also, I don't think he's wrong. But also, I was surprised to see him sort of not. Normally you'd see a fighter saying, I'd beat him or this or that. It's particularly when Tom Aspinall is likely to be fighting those top 5 fighters in his next few fights, of which Cyril Gane's a big part of that top 5. So, yeah, that was interesting. Right, Ben is ready and waiting. So we'll let you go, Matt. Really appreciate you joining us, my friend. Really enjoyed having a chat and talking to you. And obviously, when you've got a fight lined up, give me a shout and you're more than welcome to come back on the show.
Will do. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having
Good
me
luck,
on.
Matt.
And have a good rest of the show.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, mate. Matt Figlak, very interesting chat with him. Lovely so. And straight in, like the true professionals that we are, didn't forget to send the link to Ben at all as I was waiting for him to join us.
No. This has been carefully orchestrated for hours, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So welcome, Ben. It's good to have you. We haven't spoken to you for a couple of weeks, I don't think. It's been an interesting weekend of boxing. We'll start with Lee Selbys fought last night against Lemos. Came up short in a pretty big way, I think. He did hint at retirement, Lee Selbys, afterwards. What did you think of the performance of both men and the fight overall?
Yeah, it was a big ask for Lee from the start, going to the other guy's backyard, who's a strong, ferocious kind of pressure fighter. He will always be able to say box at the legendary Luna Park, which was that's the most iconic venue in Argentine boxing, where the likes of Carlos Monzon and Nicolino Loche appeared many times in the glory days. But I watched it not so long ago, about an hour ago, and Lee was under heavy pressure from the off. I think it was a gallant, honest last stand from Lee, but he was just under so much pressure from the opening bell. The other guy was, walking him down, and it was it's one thing to box circles around a guy like Hector Camacho versus Jose Luis Ramirez, for instance, because you've decided to negate his advantages in that way. It's quite another when you're under such pressure that you're forced to get on your bicycle, and then whenever Lee was also forced to extend an exchange and trade with the guy, he was coming off worse. He couldn't seem to put a dent in him. Never been the biggest puncher, Lee, just always had those sublime boxing skills. And he said himself, in terms of hinting at retirement, he said, I saw on Facebook, he said, it's getting harder to go toe-to-toe with these young guns, 10 years my junior. And I think for Lee, he's achieved the pinnacles of his career have been achieved already. They're in the rearview mirror. And even though he's still a good fighter, could no doubt still get a few paydays, I think now probably would be a good time to call time on a distinguished career.
At the end of the day, unfortunately, time waits for none of us, and it catches up with everyone. So I can certainly, I felt as I read that statement, I almost felt his pain, and I would imagine it's frustrating as a fighter when you come up against these young guys who are, not fitter, but they, got more stamina, they're quicker, they're everything about them is just fresher, isn't it? I suppose, but. Make no mistake, I think Lee Selbys had a tremendous career and he's achieved a hell of a lot. And like you say, if he doesn't want to kind of hang up the gloves, there's certainly some fights out there for him and some, like you say, some paydays to finish off. But from his statement, I wonder if that's on his mind. I guess we'll see. But he wasn't the only British fighter to fight over the weekend. We had a big fight between Josh Warrington and Kiko Martinez, which I've only seen the end of it, but it was quite a sensational finish by all accounts.
Yeah, it was. I've got it on silent in the background now because I've just been catching up with all this because I was in Nottingham last night for. I had a fight on a show in Nottingham last night, so I had the DAZN show on in the changing room it's on the phone on the DAZN app on a tripod. But we were in the ring during the main event, so I didn't catch it at the time. But I think Warrington was in a very pumped up, kind of not to be denied state of mind, and the atmosphere is incredible. You can sense it on the TV, but I'm sure it's 50 times as kind of stirring in the flesh of that, the Leeds arena that he fights in. And I think he was really, really motivated and determined. He came out right off the bat. Some people have been saying, about his dangerous use of the head and the fact that he cut Martinez in the first round, and you could tell it bothered Martinez, the accidental clash of heads. Some people argue that certain fighters, Evander Holyfield was one, but there would be other examples, and Josh has recently been cited as an example, have a kind of studied way of using their head accidentally, if you know what I mean. So that they're sufficiently reckless. I'm sure Danny understands this from his combat kind of background as well. But they have a way of doing it where that collateral damage is quite likely, and they some people argue that it's all part of the the kind of game plan. And it did appear, no doubt, it possibly did change the direction of the fight early doors. Martinez getting cut like that, but I wouldn't want to diminish Josh's victory. It's it's a sensational thing for him to regain the title because boxing very much swings and roundabouts when you look at the twists and turns of fortune. That Sinatra song about riding high in June and shot down in May, or whatever the juxtaposition is. When you look at Josh Warrington was the IBF featherweight champion, then he gave it up because he thought that made sense for his career direction. I won't go into the reasons why, but there was a trajectory that he was pursuing at the time, and he figured it was easier to give up the title and face his mandatory because he was looking at something else. Then he takes what was supposed to be just a mark in time fight against Lara and gets knocked out. Then it was inconclusive, the rematch with Lara, when it finished on the no contest because of the clash of heads, by the way, early doors, which some people blame Warrington for as well. Then you see Kid Galahad wins the vacant title and then gets sparked against the odds by Martinez sensationally a couple of months ago. And then, you fast forward to March 2022 and Warrington's back on top again. So it is a funny old game, and you can never predict how the chips are going to fall, So I wouldn't want to rain on Josh's parade by saying, he won the fight because he nutted the guy. But I've noticed some of my regulars on the Facebook page have been complaining about that today, because they don't suffer from patriotism. They call it down the middle like they see it, and that's what they've been saying.
Interesting. I mean, what would be next for Josh Warrington, do you think, in terms of opponents?
He said, in terms of opponents, I'm not sure. There's certainly plenty of fights out there. He spoke about wanting to go to the States next. He said he'd like to box in America.
Okay.
But he said also, that there are, obviously, he mentioned Lee Wood, who's involved in that movie-esque fight with Michael Conlan, which we may not have had a chance to discuss because of the problems of what I've had getting on recently. Yeah, he mentioned that, and he did say, much as I would like to go to America, for my legacy and for the adventure, he did say, I do love it here, back in Leeds, and you can't really blame him when you see the kind of fanatical support he gets. I'm not sure right now. I mean, like I say, there's plenty of options for him. I know they were talking about various big fights before he, relinquished the title the first time around. And, for Josh, who's a pretty big commercial animal in his own backyard, there's plenty of fights out there.
You mentioned the Lee Wood fight from a few weeks back. Give me your take on that, and just how special a fight it was, and obviously going off memory now, but I mean, it was movie-esque. I thought was a very poetic or good way to put it. It was very much like that.
You couldn't even say it was out of Rocky, Simon, because it was more like it was out of Raging Bull or something, when they had some crazy scenes in that film, like when people getting knocked out the ring, or riots and people getting trampled and the like. But I think as a domestic classic, I know it was a world title fight, but as a domestic world title fight classic, I think it was probably when you give the legacy of the fight time to mature and get replays over the years and decades, I think it was probably a better fight than the first Ben Eubank fight, to be honest with you. I think it was even better than that, because it wasn't just a crazy dramatic ending against the run of play. It was right from the start, I mean, Conlon floored Lee Wood heavily in the first round and looked like he was going to take care of him inside of 2 or 3. And Lee Wood was on the Zone last night commentating on the Warrington show, and he was talking to Tony Bellew and I think Laura Woods, the female presenter, his name is, and he was saying, you know what, I thought it was a flash knockdown. He said, I guess because he's just so kind of gung-ho and brave and determined. He said, I thought it was a flash knockdown. He said it's only when he saw it he realised how heavy it was. His limbs gave out underneath him, and it looked like he'd almost twisted an ankle or something when he fell. But, so, and then after that, they were just trading up. Condon was winning the fight. And you know what? I suspect Condon would win a rematch, more than likely, unless he's any psychological wear and tear from that experience that he's just gone through. But, but if his confidence is okay, I would actually fancy Condon to win a rematch. But there is a very special quality about Lee Wood, where he just really does have that never say die kind of attitude that a Jake LaMotta had, like an Arturo Gatti had. He does appear to possess that kind of level of will to win and kind of resilience, So, but no, I thought it was an amazing fight, and you've got to give credit where it was due. I think to see an extraordinary ending like that, I don't think you're going to see that too many. Once every Haley's comment, I would say.
Yeah, it was special. I think that's fair to say. In terms of boxing news this week, I noticed that it was confirmed by a few different people that Usyk is come out of the Ukraine to start preparing for the Anthony Joshua fight, which I think most people probably expected would be the case. But one thing I wanted to ask you about in regards to that is, should Usyk do a similar job in the rematch, which is not out of the question, I don't think. Where does Joshua go from there? Because I think in some ways it's a bit of a risky fight for him in some ways, because I think if he loses, the Fury fight's dead and buried. There's no way I think you can sell that, certainly at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if he loses a second time to Usyk, then there's an argument to say that he's just another marketable world-class heavyweight name, but he's not. The idea that his destiny was special and that he might be an all-time great. I'm not saying I ever endorsed that kind of thinking, but inevitably people talk that way when he was, certainly before he'd been beat by Andy Ruiz in their first fight. I think there was an argument to say that whole legacy, he was going to be the first billion-dollar athlete, and he was going to do something that's truly cemented his status amongst certainly the finest fighters and finest heavyweights. He'd still be one of the finest heavyweights ever from Britain anyway. But the idea that he'd be one of our domestic creme de la creme and would make unprecedented amounts of money, maybe that kind of part of his career will be all over. I'm not sure whether he would. Because at some point, some people were advising Anthony Joshua to retire, saying that they don't think he'll be Usyk again. And he's made a lot of money, and why doesn't he retire? But clearly, he's still hungry for legacy. And and I don't think when you've got as much money as he has, it's not always about the way he refused that step aside offer, which was whether it was ever on the table truly or not. The money that was being spoken about, was it like $5 million, I believe?
It's something ridiculous to not fight.
Yeah, which to the likes of us, it probably just sounds like an incredible amount of money for sitting out on the hypothetical bench. But to someone like Anthony Joshua who's got as much money as he has, I genuinely imagine it doesn't mean as much because he's got millions already. And I think he is very much about his legacy and his pride, and I think he wants to redeem himself, because what I've noticed is the backlash against Anthony Joshua really has been quite extraordinary.
Yes.
And I think it's down to two things, essentially. It's the losses and the sense of vulnerability and the sense and the lack of heroism that people perceived. They perceived the lack of heroism when he lost to Andy Ruiz, and they perceived something similar, if not the same, against Usyk, insofar as he was ponderous and he didn't rise to the occasion. The other thing, which it's not really part of our remit on this show, I'd imagine, but the other thing which had an effect on the way he's perceived is that Black Lives Matter thing that happened in the lockdown in the silly season when we didn't have any fights going on, and a lot of British people turned on him because of that, because whether his comments were misconstrued or misrepresented, whatever. So I think Anthony Joshua is aware of that. And I think, fighters, as famous as they get and as protected and special as they get and as rich as they get, I think it bothers them what the public think of them. And some of them are have an insecurity about their legacy. Marvin Hagler was always like that. He always felt that people valued contemporaries like Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran over him, and he didn't think he got the credit he deserved. And I think, Anthony Joshua, I think he's desperate to regain his title and to avenge the loss to Usyk. If he doesn't do it, see, I asked what would be the case. I'm sure I asked, going into the Andy Ruiz rematch, I asked Eddie Hearn. I said the same thing, right? I said, if he loses again, surely that's very damning. And Eddie Hearn just shrugged and said, well, I don't know about that. He said, okay, so he's lost twice to the same guy. What about when Marco Antonio Barrera lost twice on the spin to Junior Jones? Still went on to greater heights and cemented his legacy as an all-time great featherweight. So he was selling it to me that even if he did lose twice to Andy Ruiz, does that really have to be that damning? So your question essentially is, he's already lost once to Andy Ruiz. If he loses twice to Alexander Usyk, is that very career and legacy limited, or is it just one of those guys you can't beat and you crack on and still have a fantastic career? I don't know the answer to it, but I think it would be. I think there would be a sense he's been boxed into a corner to an extent in terms of where he goes after that.
Yeah, I mean, from Eddie Hearn's point of view, I think if he was to lose the Usyk fight, the Tyson Fury fight is just not there at the moment, which is obviously, that at one point, maybe a year or two ago, was like potentially the biggest financially, at least the biggest
ever.
Yeah, biggest ever. And I think, I'm sure in private, there's certain people within both camps which are maybe begrudge or regret, should we say, not getting it done at certain points. But I mean,
yeah,
it just hasn't happened. One thing on what you said, Ben, is I do get the impression, it's only my impression, from Anthony Joshua, some of the videos he posts and things like this and his interviews, particularly the more personal kind of interviews where he's himself. I do think he's not necessarily, he doesn't seem like he's motivated by money. I think he's more motivated by a legacy that he's got and he's going to leave behind. And I think, so in that regard, you can see why it would bother him. People like Danny slagging him off and saying he's overrated and all this sort of stuff. But I mean, as with anything, the negative people are always louder. But fact is, he's lost fights he shouldn't have lost. And Usyk made him look decidedly average on the night.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's controversial to say, is it? I thought that was pretty.
I think if you look at the skills of the two of them, there's a class gap in any case, and I think we always knew that the whole intrigue was based on the size difference, and the fact that Usyk is not a natural heavyweight by modern standards. He would have been a natural heavyweight in the old days, of course. Muhammad Ali in his early career weighed a whole lot lighter than Usyk did for the Joshua fight, So, but I think a lot of people, because he was a betting favourite, Joshua, going in, a lot of people thought, despite the wonderful skills of Usyk and the ring generalship and all the rest of it, that the size difference and the strength and the power of Joshua would still make the difference, because it is a physical game. However much you want to bang on about skills and timing and distance and anything else. So, I predicted at the time, I remember saying years ago, I didn't think Usyk was going to pull up any trees at heavyweight. Whereas obviously I take that back and hold my hands up that I was wrong now. I think he is big enough to compete with any of them. I think he would give Tyson Fury an interesting fight as well. And I think, if that was the only question, was he strong enough and was he big enough? Now we know the answer is yes. The big question is, how does Joshua ever beat him? based on that. You know what I mean? Some people
Yeah.
say he could be more aggressive, and I agree he could be more aggressive. But you know what? That could play out worse. It's not as simple as just saying you need to go at him like an animal and you need to put the pressure on him and you need to throw caution to the wind, even if you end up punching yourself out. When you've got a supremely skilled fighter like Usyk, who can bang a little bit as well, you know, he's not completely feather-fisted or anything like that, you might play into his hands by running at him. You know what I mean? So it's all very well for people on the sidelines to say he needed to be more aggressive, he needs to be more physical, he needs to maul the guy and throw him around. But you don't know for certain that is necessarily a better game plan than the more kind of confused game plan he seemed to have the first time.
Yeah, I think confused game plan's probably an interesting way to put it, because it did look like he didn't have too much of a strategy to counteract the strengths of Usyk.
Yeah.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm relying on you a bit to do so, but aren't one of Usyk's stronger traits would be his counterpunching as well? So if Joshua does go all out attack, if you like, he risks playing into his hands, like you said. So I mean, as a boxing trainer yourself, Ben, if you were in his corner, how would you be telling Anthony Joshua to go about facing Usyk in the rematch? What would the game plan be?
In all honesty, I'm not entirely sure, but you know what would be interesting? If he actually did make Usyk, as you just suggested, if he made Usyk come to him. Imagine just for a second if he decided to play it like he played the Ruiz rematch and actually go on his bike and make Usyk chase him. You know what I mean? I always thought it'd be interesting. It's a different scenario I'm alluding to, but I always thought it'd be interesting if somebody did that with Floyd Mayweather, and nobody ever really did. Zab Judah to a minor extent did, and I thought Amir Khan probably would have done if he'd have ever got a shot at Floyd Mayweather. But imagine if you made Floyd chase you. I always thought, and I'm thinking the same thing with Joshua and Usyk. If he decided to box him and be ultra mobile and come in light and not try to maximise his size advantage like they expect him to, that's what I would suggest. I would also get him to look at the Carl Mildenberger Muhammad Ali fight from 1966, because not comparing Mildenberger to Usyk in any way, because he's much more skilled than that, and I no doubt he would have beat Mildenberger. But there's something interesting about the way Ali in that fight, as well as obviously dancing and using his legs a lot, as was his one, particularly in the 1960s. Ali went the other way on the southpaw. Everybody says you go to the left against the southpaw, right? Ali was moving anti-clockwise to his right and throwing right hands and beating him to the punch with lead right hand. So I would look at something. I would look at something a bit more outside the box and telling him you need to come in as heavy as possible. You need to be as aggressive as possible, because he might have been planning to do that the first time and just realised he couldn't do it when the bell rang. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fascinating one. It is. I'm not convinced that he should go for the rematch, but I think it's not a pride thing. Well, maybe it is a pride thing that he feels that he can put on a better performance. Just before we bring Danny back in and we let you go, Ben, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned you had a fighter last night. So you were in the ring and a ringside. How did that go? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, we lost, unfortunately. The fighter is a lad called Robert Asagba. I trained him from the start of his pro career. He turned pro in 2015. And we got several wins together before he went in a different direction. We never fell out, anything like that. He went with another coach for a while, a coach here and a coach there. But we always seem to end up back with one another, working together. And he approached me several weeks ago saying that he had a fight in Nottingham against an undefeated kid called Ryan Amos up on his turf, and that he said he was going to win. He wasn't taking it as an away corner kind of fighter with that kind of ethos, like a journeyman ethos. And he said, will you train me for it? And I said, yeah, okay. I knew he was up against it. I knew we were up against it. The other kid was 7-0 going into last night's fight. Very strong guy, Ryan Amos. They call him, his nickname is the Punisher, which isn't such a bad or inappropriate moniker for him. My guy got stopped in the fourth round, probably to a great extent because he had a go. You see a lot of guys in the away corner who are not expected to win, and they just avoid harm and take the guy to the bell, mess him around a bit. Whereas Robert was committed in his approach, and he had a go. He traded with the guy, and he came off worse ultimately. The guy was very strong, and that was that. But that's all part of the game. Obviously, I mean, I didn't have hugely high expectations because I understand the realities of the game, and because we'd only had a few weeks to start working together in any case. So, but it's just more of a loyalty thing for me.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. I think if you go in there and have a go is commendable, especially if you're not expected to win or to do anything. I think it's always good to see someone having a go rather than just stretch out the 12 rounds or whatever. Right,
Ben, before Ben goes, I've been looking back at some old fights. I've been doing it for quite a while now, since really you've come on the show. I've been looking back at some of the old, more classic fights through the 80s, 90s, and just to turn the millennia. And one fight I'm kind of curious to get your opinion on, whether you think he was actually a good boxer or it was just size, because size has been mentioned numerous times. I think in the time it's kind of good to put this question to you. But Nikolai Valuev, what did you think about him? Because for listeners who perhaps don't know so much about boxing, he's like a 7 foot, 150 kilo at his peak. Yeah, I mean, he's a real size man. Obviously, didn't lose much with his results and was a world champion. Do you think he was actually a good boxer?
Not really. I think without the size, I think he would have struggled certainly. And I remember his fight with David Haye was interesting because I actually thought Haye was a little bit fortunate to win that fight, although most people kind of represented it as a masterclass and he knew exactly what he was doing. But I thought considering I've seen people challengers lose fights who threw a lot more punches than that, But no, Valuev, I think he was pretty limited. It's fair to say. But I said this at the time when Channel 5 came to our gym, the gym I was based at the time, and asked for our opinions on it. And they mocked up this thing of two boxers in the gym who there was that crazy kind of height difference between the two of them, and how was Hayter supposed to approach the fight? And what I said at the time was that Valuev, inevitably, none of these guys are as bad as they might look, to the more casual eye, because obviously it takes a certain amount of entry-level skills to get to a certain level. And obviously Valuev had a lot of fights, and he had a certain amount of schooling and a certain amount of skills. But no, I think he had that freak show value. He was well managed, which makes a massive difference certainly in professional boxing. So ultimately, no, I wouldn't say he was technically great.
Yeah, I think a lot of people perhaps sold on his incredible size and extremely ugly guy. He looked every bit of a fighter, a monster, a rogue almost. I suppose is a good way to describe his looks. But I know Holyfield said that he looks like he should hit harder than he felt that he was when he was receiving his hits. So he did lose Holyfield, didn't he? It was a bit of a bore fest, that fight. But he said he didn't hit harder. Or he's been in there with a lot smaller guys that bang a lot harder.
Yeah, because
and perhaps that'll be a surprise for people.
I think power, it's based on certain things, isn't it? And size isn't really one of them. Obviously, you're going to have a certain power to weight ratio. That's just physics. But there are other factors. I don't know about the UFC so much, although I suspect it's similar in many ways in this way, because if you look at a lot of devastating punches from the world of boxing, quite a lot of them are wiry and relatively skinny, as opposed to, with that fast twitch, as opposed to big stocky kind of bangers that you get. And I don't know if that's mirrored in your sport in MMA or not, but
yeah, it's normally, it can be that way, certainly on the feet. I would say that some of the strikers that are standing out are more worry and fast switch. MVP who fights on Bellator. Yeah. I don't know whether you know that guy. Yeah. I mean, I've had him train. Yeah, we've had him train at our gym numerous times, and extremely quick. But the shorter, stockier, more powerful set guy, normally ones that fare better once they got it down to the ground. They can seem to generate a lot of velocity with small space to work. They can be really devastating in ground and pound situations. It's just kind of interesting. And just one question, sorry, Ben, just to wrap it up really. How do you think Tyson Fury would have dealt with someone like Valuev if he was about during his time, being that he was taller? Could have this posed problems, or do you think he would have just danced around him?
I think he would have boxed rings around him. Yeah, Tyson. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think thing with Fury that you have to give him is he's a very good all-rounder, you know, and he showed certainly in the Wilder second fight that he was able to get on the front foot and be very aggressive and to push somebody around and to back the puncher up and take his advantages away and take the long levers away. And he showed in the first fight, which we already knew, that he had that ability to dance and move on his toes and to jab and move.
Right.
Pot shot, as we call it, you know. So I think Fury does have a lot going for him. Obviously, we will get to see him presumably on April 23rd, although some people are making noises that it's all a bit quiet and they haven't even announced an undercard yet. And so there are people trying to predict that this fight still won't happen, you know that, including Eddie Hearn said, "I'm so glad I'm not involved. You know, there's still lots of problems." And obviously other people saying, "Oh yeah, fuck off, Eddie. All you're doing is you're just dissing it because you're not involved. You're not glad you're not involved. You wish you won the first bid." You know, but we will have a lot to talk about whether it comes off or not, you know, either way. But yeah, Fury is, love him or hate him, he's got a lot going for him. And assuming he could get old at any moment, I suppose, you know, because he's not the most active of fighters, like, you know, a lot of heavyweights aren't these days, and a lot of fighters in general at the highest level aren't as active as they used to be. But Fury, if he's on song, I expect him to remind us again why he's the best heavyweight in the world on April 23rd, if nothing goes wrong.
Do you know, Ben, I saw a video clip, I think it was on Instagram. I think it was with Dillian White's brother, but certainly it was someone from within his team. He basically said that Dillian White gets paid, I think it was $5 million or whatever he gets, and none of his money is dependent on how many pay-per-views they sell. Whereas Tyson Fury's money, obviously he gets mega bucks if they sell X amount of pay-per-views, blah, blah, blah. So that's why he wasn't at the
press conference.
And he kind of gave the impression that he probably won't turn up to any further press conferences either, which I found really kind of interesting. Do you think there's a chance that he really kind of doesn't promote the fight in any meaningful way?
I think he's pretty much shown his hand now, and he's got to stick to that. Yeah, I believe he's obliged to go to the final presser, literally, the one that would be on the Thursday usually before the Saturday. It's usually like this. There's public workout on a Wednesday, you've got the final presser on a Thursday, you have the weigh-in on a Friday, and then the fight on the Saturday. I hear what they're saying. By the way, people say that's not really Dillian White's brother. Apparently his name is Lamar Scott, and he changed his name to Dean White. And Dean described him in an old interview when in the start of his career. He said, "This guy Lamar Scott is like a brother to me." And now he's literally. It shows you how powerful those sentiments can be, because he's become a brother to him at some point in the interim. But I will say, if he chooses to call himself Dean White, and I'm not 100% certain he's not Dylan's brother, but people say he isn't. But he's a nice fella. He's used that trajectory, you know, to get involved in boxing, and he's doing his thing. But whether it's right or wrong for Dillian White to have the attitude, it's true what you said, that he has no percentage in the pay-per-view. Some people are saying, yes, that may be so, but you're still getting a really big payday, and you should be making more of an effort to make yourself more of a star in the States anyway, right? Because and you could do that in this build-up, not just from the fight itself. But do you know what? On one level, it's almost a little bit refreshing, because things have become so media saturated in this era. There is something a little bit refreshing about a guy who says, "The hell with all that. I'll see you on fight night." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get my money, and at the end of the day, in some ways it's their fault for not structuring it in a way that he had to turn up to the press conferences, or he was dependent on the pay-per-views for part of his money, or whatever. You know, whichever way you look at it. He's not doing anything contractually wrong. You know,
and the thing is, if they'd have desired him to go to the pressers and to attend the media calls, they should have stipulated that in the contract, because it doesn't have to be tied to the pay-per-view. It could be tied to the contract and tied to your purse as it stands. You know,
it's part of the job.
Yeah, but the other thing that's interesting is some people are suggesting that Fury needs that other guy in his proximity at these events to try and build his whole kind of psychological kind of wall of ego that he wants to erect around himself. Muhammad Ali was similar in that regard, certainly. and that he needed the stooge and the fall guy or the adversary and the bit player, right? And some people are suggesting psychologically it is impeding Tyson Fury's whole process of getting it in the zone for war because he's got nobody to harangue and he's got nobody to go back and forth with. So some people are saying that it's something of a masterstroke on Dillian Whyte's part for that reason, regardless of the financial explanation for it.
Interesting. Obviously, it will remain to be seen if it works, but I can see the logic behind it. Like Tyson Fury enjoys that back and forth, that confrontation in the build-up to his fights. Often creates it, out of not a lot. So if he's got no one to argue with, who's he going to? It's kind of one of those, isn't it? But obviously, remains to be seen if it's an effective plan.
It's become a story in itself. That's what I will say. Whatever it lacks in traditional build-up, because one of the guys has not been there so far and has been silent, it's become its own kind of mystique that Dillian hasn't said anything. You know what I mean? So that is the story now, isn't it? Will he or won't he? Will he turn up? Which works on another level. It works as some sort of marketing, I suppose. It's still, people are still talking about it. So either way, it's working perfectly for the people who make money from such things. Right then, Ben, appreciate as always you dropping by to talk to us about boxing, and I'm sure we'll see you very, very soon in some capacity. No doubt. But cheers, mate. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Ben.
See you next time. Thank you.
There we go, Ben Doughty. And now, Danny, you are going to have to break down. One, you're going to have to alter your camera slightly because we've now got a different overlay. Two, you're going to have to break down the UFC in very quick time. I know why I fitted in some of it earlier just to relieve you a little bit on that side of things. So we'll start with Kai Kara-France defeated. So Kai Kara-France ranked 6th, defeated number 2 ranked Askarov via unanimous decision in a very big victory for him. I got to be honest, it's a big one.
It was a close contested match. It was a case of one wanting the wrestling aspects and getting it to the ground, and the other trying to make his impressions on the feet. Kara-France was really, really impressive and had his moments, although I think his opponent was so good at enforcing those wrestling exchanges in the early part, especially in that first round. I don't know whether you've seen the fight, but he was on Kara's back for pretty much majority of the first round. Very, very dodgy in certain situations, like the choke was going on numerous times. And this was all contested on the feet, very, very similar to Jordan Visenic's situation that he had against Endon. It wasn't looking very clever for him, but he started showing some incredible defensive aspects. He knew how to adapt his game on the job, so to speak, and Kara-France was looking very, very good. I wouldn't have been surprised if the judges went the other way either. It was one of those that was that was very, very close. Askarov is a difficult customer for anyone, really, really is. Kara-France as well, he demonstrated some incredible, almost inhuman ability to stay on his feet in the first part as well. I don't know if you remember the first exchange of the wrestling, but he's pulled up on one leg and was somehow not going to his back. But Askarov, he's a very, very shrewd wrestler and chained it together well to get him to expose his back on the feet, where, like I say, he was on his back for the whole of the round. But Kara-France, he ended up figuring it out and managed to get some activity going, made some consequential strikes land, and it was enough to push the judges in his favour. I got a feeling these two will meet sometime in the future. I think they're two young guys that are going to come up through the ranks and inevitably have to face each other again. But there's a good matchup this time around. I think next time around it'd be even better because they've been in there and felt each other out. But well done to Kara-France. He moves onwards and upwards.
Yeah, and I think it's a big victory for him because actually I think Askarov is a very, very good fighter. He's not number 2 in that division for no reason. So from that point of view, even though it was a close fight and maybe it could have gone either way, ultimately for Kara-France's record is beautiful.
It is. I just don't.
Just what he needed.
I don't think you see. these two won't be dropping out the top 10 anytime soon. Hence, I think it'll be juggled around positionally, and I think they'll be facing each other again. Who knows? Maybe for a title next time around. But they will be spudding gloves and doing this one again sometime.
Absolutely. Then we spoke about Matt Brown's fight, so we'll move on to Alexa Grasso defeated the Scot Joanne Wood via a rear naked choke. I really wanted Joanne Wood to get this victory. It was a big fight. So we're fighting a number 7 opponent, but
it was. Yeah, look, Wood's got some really nice striking, hasn't she? I like the way she strikes and has good work ethic there. She chucks out a lot of strikes. But Grasso knew what she had to do. She had to get it to the ground. Now, the disappointing thing for me regards Wood was Grasso never really had to work the first takedown. She kind of fell off balance to her bum. It was really weird. And, if I was her coach or in the corner, I would have been not very happy bunny. Not very happy bunny. Didn't make Alexa work for the takedown at all. And from there, she enjoyed the fruits of that position for quite some time before finally Wood got up onto her feet and looked like, perhaps she'll have an opportunity to work well. Now, Joanne Wood looked like she could have been doing something good in that clinch exchange. She looked like she was trying to do like some kind of Uchimata. Overcommitted it, stumbled, lost balance again, and exposed her back, and then she had to go to the ground again. But this time with Alexa Grasso on her back, and that's not a good thing for anyone, any level, regardless of your grappling critique. But Wood's perhaps a little lacking in the grappling department compared to someone like Grasso, and it really did show. She couldn't hold her off for long before that choke sunk in, and it was game over for Wood. Definitely needs to do something regards of her foot positioning, balance. There was an issue with her base. And there really is no excuses for that being in the UFC. You just shouldn't be falling over to your bum like that, and shouldn't be overcommitting takedown attempts in your own right to a point where you expose your back. So 2 massive mistakes in Wood's game that she's going to have to definitely put right if she wants to face these top grapplers in the future. She can't give them that many opportunities, and she gave 2 massive ones in one round, and she never got to even see the first bell.
Yeah, unfortunately, Alexa Grasso showed why she is ranked number 9 in the rankings, and Joanne Wood just showed a little bit of inexperience, whatever you want to say.
Pretty much that.
But it just didn't work out for her. But look, it was a big day for Joanne Wood in the co-main event. And it's it's by no means is it the end or anything like that. She just needs to go away and do a bit of work.
No, and just to touch, just finally to cap that off, it was nice to see another female pair being put up onto the main card, and I feel like and perhaps this is not happening enough. We went through a spate, wasn't it, where the females seem to be getting up on that main card fairly often. I feel like that's tapered off a little bit, and I think that's a little disappointing. I feel like that needs to change. Just as a little personal gripe, I want to see more female belts up on that main card.
Yeah, I think the problem they got is outside of the really big names, they haven't done a great job of building up some of the younger girls.
Agreed. Not enough attention on.
They will do.
Yeah.
So there's a few really talented young ladies down there, so it's certainly worth it.
Yeah.
So we talked about the main event. Did you see the Neil Magny fight with Max Griffin? Yes,
I did. I really enjoyed it. Both impressed me. Max Griffin perhaps impressed me more in the early first 2 rounds, showing some great tactical footwork to keep Magny guessing. Every time Magny did sort of like bed down on his shots, he was getting kicked on the leg. Just couldn't get anything off. The commentators picked up on the fact that Magny needed to activate his jab and build off of his jab, but just wasn't being allowed to by Griffin. But Magny, being so experienced, really been in there with some top tier guys, it really has, and he knew how to switch it up on the job and change the trajectory of the fight and try and find a ways to win somewhere else. And that was in that clinch, using his long limbs. Started tying Griffin up. Max Griffin started looking like he was becoming slightly laboured, frustrated with what was happening. But it was a great switch up by Neil Magny. Really good game planning on the job, because this is not something that perhaps they was expecting. I think they was expecting to perhaps win it with his range and height and footwork and perhaps dominate it on the feet with the striking. But when it weren't going their way, they had to change something pretty quick, because he was running out of time in that fight. But him and his camp, they switched it up and they managed to squeeze a win and rob Max Griffin from victory. But I don't want to take anything away from Max Griffin. In defeat, he still performed exceptionally well. It says that he come up against a very cunning, very crafty and experienced Neil Magny. And Magny had to call upon everything in his previous experiences to find a way to get a win. But boy, did he do it. And impressed me. Both of them impressed me, to be honest. None of them lost face in this fight. And I think although Max Griffin lost, he can come away with smiling about some of the performances that he gave within that fight. Really, really good. But onwards, upwards for Neil Magny. This guy's still a threat to anyone in that division. He is. And I know he fell a little short, a number of fights ago, but look, he's back up there in contention. I have no doubt that he's got the capabilities to take it all the way. He's a threat to anyone in that division right now.
Yes, it's been very, very interesting. So we'll just have a very quick look at next week's UFC. We've also got a Cage Warriors event coming up very soon, which is they normally have a bit of a bigger gap between them, but we've got a double show in Manchester coming up, and then I think there's one in Belfast as well, which I would expect Rhys McKee to be main eventing with new mate.
Yeah.
Cage
absolutely.
Warriors are going to do a Belfast show. Obviously, you've got a few Irish talents within their ranks. So next week is UFC 273. Oh, my days. Look at that card. So main event, mate, Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. Oof.
Yeah, I can't see Zombie doing it, though. I just can't. I mean, he could possibly cut him, but I just think he's up against it a little bit. I just think stylistically he's just going to get his style squashed out of him. I don't know. It's going to be hard night for him, I really believe.
Yeah, I don't see him getting the victory, but what I would like nothing more, and I like Volkanovski, what I would like nothing more is to see Korean Zombie just catch him with some weird kick up.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Knock him out and get that belt.
I mean, Zombie could win it because of some kind of singular event, spinning elbow, jumping there. He could pull something funky off, or like I say, cause a cut that could perhaps become a deciding factor in it. But I think tactically, it's Volkanovski's all day long each round. I think the rounds will keep getting pinched away from Korean Zombie. He has to really try to hunt for an outright finish. If it goes the distance, Zombie's just not going to win it. Can't see him winning it. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult one for him. And then we've got Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan for the... Is that for the bantamweight title? I think it is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
2 title matches on the same card. Well.
Yeah.
Who you got there, mate? Because that is
based on the
humdinger.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great fight. I mean, based on the way that they was performing last time they fought out, I feel like Petr Yan's, I think he's just got the advantage psychologically over Sterling. I think he's got him over a barrel mentally. And then, of course, consequentially of that, it's going to show through in the technique and tactics and strategy. I just think Petr Yan has just been performing incredible. He's clearly just in the peak of his career right now. And that's going to be the case for the next 3 years minimum. I just think Sterling's up against it again. But look, Sterling's an incredible athlete in his own right. Really, really is. He could be coming with a different game plan to try to, not Petr Yan off his stride, but I don't think he's got the capabilities to do so. I really don't.
Strategist.
Yes.
Aljamain Sterling. So I'd be interested. I will be interested to see how he tries to combat Petr Yan, because Petr Yan has been so good,
so aggressive as well. So aggressive.
He's just his strikes and everything is just incessant, like it's constant. And I just wonder how Aljamain Sterling will try to combat that.
Sure. Yeah, me too.
Quite interesting. And then we've also got Gilbert Burns versus Kazmat Chimaev. fully expecting Darren Till to be in Chimaev's corner the way those two have been having a bit
Yeah.
of a love
Yeah,
in.
yeah, that's nice to see, though, to be
It is
honest.
very nice
Yeah.
to see.
I know Chimaev is not really, perhaps for many, beaten the right type of person to warrant his hype, but I think that's just about to happen. I think for me, Gilbert Burns is a fantastic athlete, absolutely, but cardio is a factor that I think is a weakness and chink in his game. And Chimaev could really push this pace on him. I think the longer it goes on, the more in favour of Chimaev winning it outright. If Gilbert Burns is going to win it, he's going to have to win it in the first 1.5 rounds, I would say. I think anything thereafter, with the way that Chimaev seems to be pushing the pace, as long as he can really keep that pace, and the kind of stories we're hearing, and we're hearing from people that train with him, he's got cardio for days. I think Gilbert Burns is going to have a terrible trouble trying to keep up with Chimaev. So my money's on Chimaev.
Yeah, I think so. Just to show you how ridiculously loaded this card is, on the prelims, we have Ian Gary versus Darian Weeks. Are we going with Ian Gary to continue his?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, he looked a little nervous, didn't he, last time he fought? But he still pulled it off. I think once he feels a little settled, we'll start seeing that natural ability he's got, and some, because there's no doubt, being at a young age, he's made some increments of improvement in his game. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him progress. Yeah, he's on the undercard. I mean, out of the interest of us personally, because he's a UK-based fighter, of course, we'd like to see him up on the main card. But he's got to prove himself a little bit more.
It wasn't even that necessarily that fight, because I can understand why he's on the prelims. He's obviously in his second fight in UFC.
Sure.
But then you've also got Jairzinho Rosenstruck versus Martin Tibera. And I mean, look, this is kind of the times that these guys are now, they're getting into the latter parts of their career. And rightly, they're on the prelims, because you've got people like Chimaev who deserve, these young guys deserve to be, up on that main card. And I'm glad, in some ways, I'd rather see a prelim with Rosenstruck and Tibera fighting in the heavyweight division than see their main event just like a meaningless fight.
Yeah.
Tonight, if that makes sense.
I get you. Sure.
I want to see these young men and women main eventing, not kind of the tried and tested guys. I would like to see them, dropping down the cards a bit and having the young guys take those fight night cards and stuff.
Sure.
Like we saw last week with UFC London.
Do you know why I think we don't see that? I think Dana White, he's been around this sport, running this company for quite some time now. He wants to do it so that these youngsters know that on that prelim cards, they have to fight hard, display their full skill sets. If it was so easy to get on that main card just because you're young and youthful, it'd be a little bit too easy. But I think that's what I understand what you're saying, and I don't entirely disagree.
That's how you build your new range of stars, is having the main event, the non-pay-per-view cards. I mean, we only talked a couple of minutes ago about them not doing enough with some of the women. If they come back to the UK, for instance, there's so many guys who could potentially main event, depending on where the card is. It's unreal. Like if it's in Liverpool, you have Paddy. If it's in Manchester, you've got Aspinall. If it's in Wales, you've got Jack Shaw. It's never ending, is it? You've got all sorts of guys who could main event.
Yeah, I think so, though. With the women, it's almost like they're at a different stage of their development right now, and I think with the youngsters and the more experienced fighters, there's a business model to try to run the company on, and I just think I would like to see, as a fan of the female fighters, see some of the female fights, even if they are lower end in their experience and their total of fights, on that main card more, to create more attention for them, to perhaps give the sense of status more. So I think it would just help ignite the fire there, and perhaps give it a little bit more attention, so the fans can start.
The only problem I see with it is, with Joanne Wood, I thought I was so happy to see her in that co-main event slot last night, but the way she lost the fight with the grappling and how but how lacking she looked in a defense of the grappling against Grasso probably wouldn't help in terms of how the higher ups look at it. Does that make sense?
I do, yeah.
Because she looked a bit lost. Like, so is that co-main event quality?
Yeah,
maybe
but that's
not.
that's what I mean. Though they're at a different stage of their development, right? And
but there's women out there though, mate, who could do. There is women out there who, like Molly McCann is one who's not in the rankings, but you could do a co-main event with her against the right opponent.
I think so.
Sure. Yeah. Because she's got a following, she's exciting to watch. There's no reason why you shouldn't put her in for a fight night card, get her in a co-main event, make sure it's against someone else. Styles make fights, as we always say. She's one that could be pushed now to the next level. She's got the popularity. And the women's fights, they're always entertaining. Always.
Yeah, I just think that Joanna Wood fight was a bad example, really. But think of how many female bouts have been on that.
I used it because she was in the co-main event. As basically
sure, yeah. I
do get what you mean.
I get you, but look, how many times have we seen absolute barn burners in the female bouts in the prelims? Which the performances themselves really deserve to have a bigger slot on the fight card. But it will come. It will come in time without doubt. And maybe I'm trying to rush it along a little bit because I'm just such a big fan of watching these females come up and through. I think it's just
getting the right ones, isn't it?
Fresh new faces, isn't there, coming up? I'm just curious of the matchups. I want to see them on the main cards, but their time will come.
Absolutely, mate. There's it's just getting the right ones in the right slots, I think. But in terms of getting them on, I don't know why they don't use the women more to open the main cards, because more often than not, the women's fights are exciting. They're even if they go the full 3 rounds, it's like toe to toe for 3 rounds.
Yes.
So that's the perfect fight for your first fight on the main card.
Agreed.
So I do wonder why they don't do that more. Even if they're maybe not up to the co-main event slot, get them off the prelims and get them on the, opening the cards. Get them opening that main card.
That's it.
But there we go. Like, I thought Corey McKenna's fight was a good choice to open the prelims at UFC London, because you knew they were going to stand and bang and have a good, it didn't go her way. And I'm speaking to her on Tuesday. She's coming into the studio, which I'm kind of really looking forward to getting her take on it. Now she's had a week to digest it and kind of how she feels about it, because, she's very disappointed that she wasn't able to come away with a win. I think there was positives to take from the fight, but I think there was also, some negatives as well, as there always is with a loss. But I'm really looking forward to having a chat with her, actually.
And maybe, put it to her in a nice way about, how I felt about it.
You spent an hour slagging her off. Yeah, I'll tell her.
No, not at all. But just that I felt frustrated, that I feel like every time that she got a clear advantage, which was shooting in and getting the girl down, that she never resorted to doing that more. It was, a little confusing to me. But who knows? We could have been a slight ankle twist there that was provoking her, and she just had to be more sure. Who knows? At the end
of the fight, she was sort of rotating her ankle as if there was a twist there.
We just don't know. Know.
She hasn't said anything when I've spoken to her over the last week or so, like on and off, about any injuries. So hopefully she's fit and well. Right. As always, mate, absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed this evening.
Been a good one.
On fine form, Thanks to Ben for joining us talking boxing. Thanks to Matt Figlak as well. We'll be back next week with another top guest or 2 from the world of combat sports. So please do join us. And don't forget to spread the word as well. It's really important. Helps us out a lot. Tell people about the fight show. They can listen to it or they can watch it on YouTube. But just tell them. Tell them, because that I cannot tell you how much that helps us out a lot. Don't forget to check out Violent Money. If you want to buy something, use the code ACE20, get 20% off. Got some lovely stuff on their website. There's some really good training apparel as well. And check out the UK's first smart MMA gym at the Violent Money Academy social media pages. But until next week, we bid you farewell. Let's go. Good night.
Good night.
He says, and he hasn't got the clip ready, so we're still here. There we go.